Hello everybody, I'm Slice. Welcome to part 3 of the ATM Star Guide for all the mods 8. In parts 1 and 2, we cover the outer section of the ATM Star. If you missed that, please pause this video and give them a watch to make sure you are caught up and ready to jump in. In this episode, we'll cover the Withers Compass, the Pulsating Black Hole, the Nexium Emitter, and the Patrick Star. Each part of this guide will have chapters down in the description so you can return to specific parts when you need to. The first item we'll cover today is the Withers Compass. This one is one of the longer crafts and it also takes some late game setup. Finishing the Withers Compass will require you to defeat the Warden and trap a Wither. The first piece of the recipe is going to be the Heart of the Deep, which is what drops when the Warden is defeated. Next up, we'll need 4 Antimatter Crystals. That requires you to have 2 energy crystals per, antimatter 6 per, and another star. We'll cover how to make this antimatter in a moment. But first, let's go ahead and finish the craft. Energy crystals require you to have 4 redstone, 2 glowstone, 2 silicon, and a diamond. Antimatter is constructed via an antimatter constructor. All you have to do is supply energy and it will produce antimatter. This is a relatively slow process, depending on your energy setup. Now, the reason why I mention that is because this machine, as far as I can tell, only accepts energy from the FTB industrial contraption cables. So we're talking about the LV cable, the MV, the HV, and the EV. Now, the rate of input does change, so that's a positive. So you could eventually get to EV cables if you wanted to. But I have these other ones showing here to show you that these don't work. Okay, so directly putting this doesn't work. Putting this doesn't work. This, the universal pipe, it connects, but it doesn't supply energy. Okay, so if we go ahead and force that, so now this is supposedly pulling energy out. Okay, this is full of energy. Notice that it's not turning on. I have it tied into an infinite lava source. Okay, and it's not producing energy. I was doing some various testing, that's why there's some energy here, but that does not work. Okay, so what you need to do is to have an LV cable or the higher tier cables. So you notice that it's now turned on. This energy pipe also does not work. It doesn't even connect. The modular router, it can't supply energy to it. Literally the only way that I've been able to find to supply energy to the antimatter constructor is via these cables. So make sure when you're going through this that you intentionally use the LV through EV cables and not any other power source, unless of course you've been able to do that. So here's some ideas of what you could use. A basic generator. This is your typical, burn something to produce fuel. It is pretty, as the name implies, basic. It's not that great. Earlier on in the ATM Star Guide, I mentioned doing a lava setup in the Nether for infinite lava. So that's what I did in my Let's Play. I have lava just set up and pumping into the geothermal generator. I think I actually have 2 geothermals. It's not super fast, but it doesn't need to be because over time, this antimatter constructor will just simply produce. Okay. Now, another thing, if you really want to get deep into it, you could make a nuclear reactor. I'm not going to go into how to set that up in this guide as I didn't do it in my Let's Play because it's not needed. Another option is solar panels. Okay, now these you will need to craft eventually anyway. So if you want to go this route of being able to supply a little bit of energy, might not necessarily be a bad idea. As you go up, the energy goes up as well. It produces quite a bit, though it is rather expensive to get to the EV solar panel. So how do we craft this antimatter constructor? It requires you to have 4 glowstone dust, 2 advanced machine blocks, 2 iridium circuits, and a nether star. The iridium circuits and the advanced machine blocks I'm going to have to show you a little bit later, as they're required in a lot of different crafting. But what you'll need, what you'll want to get started sooner rather than later, is a compressor and being able to craft the coal ball, which is just 8 pieces of coal and a piece of flint. And what you can do with that is put that into a compressor and you get a compressed coal ball out of it. You'll need this quite a bit for various crafting. You'll also want to be able to craft this industrial grade metal, which all you do is you bake an iron ingot for that. Additionally, you'll want to bake some slime balls to be able to produce rubber, as rubber will be needed in numerous crafting recipes as well. Additionally, you'll want to set up yourself a mechanism crusher and crush some coal to be able to get a handful of coal dust, as you'll need that as well. Next up, we'll cover one of the more complicated setups. Currently, what I'm looking at is a flat surface look at it, so that way you can maybe take a picture of it. Our first line is the sulfur dust line. We can take from our storage, input into the chemical oxidizer, that outputs into the chemical infuser. Additionally, we need to pull some water into an electrolytic separator, so that way we can get some oxygen for this chemical infuser. Now, the side of this is extremely important. Okay, the oxygen must go on the left, and the other part needs to go on the right. Okay, so when you go to set up this machine, make sure that the chemical infuser has the sides appropriate for that. Okay, so the front here is set to red, which is the left, and then the left side of this machine is set to orange, which is the right input. Okay, that's important because if you flip-flop them, it won't work. At least it didn't for me. That output gets sent to the chemical infuser, and what we're looking for here is a water vapor out of this rotary condensator set to decondensating, because you can actually toggle these. Okay, make sure that it's pointing to the left from the right. Okay, and what that'll do is it'll take water and make water vapor and input into the chemical infuser. That will then combine into an output that gets sent to this chemical oxidizer. And that's where the second line sort of begins. We have uranium ingot coming in from the right, and we have fluorite coming in from the left. So let's go ahead and cover the fluorite real quick. With the fluorite going into the chemical dissolution chamber, it produces an output that gets sent into this chemical infuser. With the uranium ingot, it gets enriched in the enrichment chamber, combined with this first chemical infuser output into the chemical oxidizer to produce another gas. Okay, now we have 2 gases that are being combined into what is needed in the isotopic centrifuge to make fissile fuel. At this point, you'll want to put the output, the fissile fuel, into a quantum entangler, so that way you can transport the fissile fuel across dimensions. You can have this setup anywhere you want. Anywhere. You can have it expanded if you want. You can have it sped up if you want, to be able to produce more fissile fuel. The moment you take that fissile fuel away into the next part, I highly recommend that reactor be built nowhere near base, and ideally in a different dimension. I recommend going into compact machines. So you don't have to have the largest compact machine, but the largest one really isn't that expensive. Okay, so what we have is a compact machine wall. This will produce, I believe, 8. Yeah, it'll produce 8. using 8 different polished deep slates. Okay, once you have those crafted, you combine that with a block of netherite to make the compact machine maximum, which I believe is 13 by 13. Yep, 13 by 13 by 13 internal size. So technically the compact machine is like 15 by 15 by 15, but all we care about is the interior. You'll also need to craft yourself a personal shrinking device using an iron ingot, a book, glass pane, and 2 eyes of ender. This will allow you to actually get into the compact machine and out of the compact machine. Before we jump into the fission reactor itself, I'd like to cover an option for instant max water production with integrated dynamics. You may want this for the fission reactor as it will consume a lot of water, especially if you end up forcing the reactor to do a lot more than just the baseline production. You may have seen these trees around. These are the mineral trees from Integrated Dynamics. When you harvest them or knock them down, you can find these crystallized mineral chunks in these enriched mineral logs. Most of the logs will just be regular mineral logs, but you can get some out of these enriched mineral logs. Okay. Now, let's say you don't get a whole lot of these enriched mineral logs. You can still plant them and, keep harvesting them back and back and back. Or what we can do is force it to happen. Now, before we do that, what we're looking for is to be able to craft this block of crystallized mineral. So it only takes 4. So you don't really need a lot. But let's say that you didn't get what you needed out of like 1 tree or 2 trees or, something like that. What we'll want to do is craft ourselves a squeezer, which takes 2 oak planks, 4 sticks, a block of iron, and an iron ingot. Okay, and what this does is it will squeeze various things into something. Okay, so you can produce coal dust with it. You can produce sand with it, raw uranium. There's a lot of things that you can do with this. So it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to have near like the start of a world. But in order to get this block of mineral, okay, you can either craft. Oh, well, that's interesting. The recipe might have changed. Okay, so this actually requires 9, not 4. What we can do is we can take a mineral log, okay, and we can plop it down into the squeezer, and then we can jump on it. And what will happen is out of 1 log, it'll produce enough mineral resin to make yourself a block. It's not too bad, right? Pretty inexpensive. And I would think that that's a little bit cheaper than worrying about harvesting a bunch of trees. Now, this is a little bit of a manual process, but in order to get this back up, before you get the mechanical squeezer, you can just use a button and it'll reset it. Okay. Now, in order to make a drying basin, which is what produced that mineral block, you want to use 4 oak logs, 2 iron ingots, and 2 black dye. This basin is also used in other ways. I use this a lot to get some early game leather. It's actually extremely useful for that. And then there's, you can also make dried kelp with it. You can do dried bush, which is useful in other recipes. So it's not a bad little early game thing to have anyway. Next up, we'll want to craft ourselves at least 1 logic cable. Feel free to produce more if you want, but that takes 6 crystallized mineral chunks, 2 sticks, and a redstone dust. Next up, we'll need to craft ourselves at least 3 variable cards. Each card requires you to craft, actually, I think it's, okay. So 1 craft of this produces 24. You'll need to use 3 in what I'm explaining. But that requires you to have 8 crystallized mineral chunks and a piece of paper. Now, this one, the input variable transformer, you won't need for what I'm explaining here, but I figured I'd put it in just so that way you can see the difference here. Okay, so a input variable transformer takes a card, 2 crystallized mineral chunks, 2 cards, and a sticky piston. Okay, the one that we actually need is an output variable card, and the only difference is that it's a piston, not a sticky piston. Next up, we'll have the fluid interface. We'll need at least 2 of these, as you'll be using one and then using one inside of a crafting recipe. So to do that, you have 5 crystallized mineral chunks and a bucket. This is the fluid exporter, and you'll be using an output variable transformer and the fluid interface that you just crafted. Next up, we'll need to craft the logic programmer, which is a pretty simple one, and why we needed the block of crystallized mineral to combine it with a crafting table to make the logic programmer. Okay, so what we're looking for here, once you place the programmer down, we're looking for integer. Okay, so there's a lot of different things in here that you can do. You can logic program to your heart's content. The only thing that we currently need for this is integer. Okay, and what we're going to be doing here is putting in the max allowable integer. Okay, this will be in the description down below, so that way you can copy paste it if you want. But this is the max integer allowed. Okay, once that is set, all you have to do is pull that out, and you now have a max integer variable card. Now we get to craft and build the reactor. First up is the steel casing. This takes 4 steel ingots, 4 glass, and an osmium ingot. Then we can craft the reactor glass, which takes 4 enriched iron, 4 lead ingots, and 1 glass for 4 reactor glass. Next is the fission reactor casing, which takes 4 lead ingots and a steel casing. This also crafts 4 fission reactor casings. Now we have the fission reactor port, which takes 4 fission reactor casings and a elite control circuit. This crafts 2 ports at a time. Now we'll craft basic chemical tanks, which takes 4 osmium ingots and 4 redstone dust. We use those to help craft the fission fuel assembly, which takes 2 steel ingots, 6 lead ingots, and a basic chemical tank. Finally, for the reactor, we have the control rod assembly, which takes 4 steel ingots, 4 lead ingots, and an elite control circuit. In total, what you'll need is 130 reactor casings, some of which will be used in crafting the ports, 188 reactor glass, 104 fission fuel assemblies, 13 control rod assemblies, 4 fission reactor ports, and at least 1 radioactive barrel, which is made by doing 4 steel ingots and 4 lead ingots. Additionally, you'll want to craft your hazmat suit. If you don't do this and you start the reactor, chances are you'll become irradiated and you'll suffer radioactive poisoning and you'll eventually die. This is a requirement for any time you go near radioactive areas. These are crafted using lead ingots and the appropriate dye. Okay, so the helmet will take orange, the chest piece will take orange, and the pants will take orange, but the boots will take black dye. Before jumping in, we'll also want to craft ourselves an entangled binder using 2 unobtainium ingots, 2 ender pearls, and ender chest, as well as at least 2 entangled blocks. These are crafted using 4 ender pearls, 4 unobtainium ingots, and an ender chest. These aren't 100% required, but it will make life significantly easier for being able to transport between dimensions. And you'll see why when we get to building the reactor. This reactor is 7 by 7 by 11. The outer casing needs to be entirely reactor casings. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and then we'll want to throw in the 4 ports. These can be anywhere on the sides that you want. And then let's drop in the glass. Okay, so now let's go ahead and place down 13 of these fuel assemblies. Okay, so in a checkerboard pattern. And on the very last one before the top, okay, so this one went a little bit too far. We'll want to place the control rods. Okay, now on top of that, what we can do is set the casings down. Sometimes that, I believe it's the cork mod, throws off my block placement a little bit. Okay, and you see the particles, that's how you know that the reactor is fully built. So you can access it now. Okay, this is kind of just like a timed, hey, this is, you know, showing a graph. It's a heat graph. Okay, right now there is no heat, so it's just a stagnant 0. Now let's go ahead and build our water. Take the fluid exporter and stick it on the actual reactor. Take the fluid interface and place it on the sink. Then attach them using a logic cable. On the fluid exporter, we're going to want to go to export fluid amount and place that variable card that we just made. You can see that it instantly filled up the entire reactor. Now, if you don't have a max integer card here, it will slowly fill up. Okay, this does hold a lot of water. Notice here that it's almost 54 million millibuckets. Okay, now we can actually continue to set things up. So let's go with a pressure tube. You'll have your quantum entangleporter unless you have your setup right next to your reactor. But right now I have a creative chemical tank just holding an infinite amount of fissile fuel. But then you import it into the system so that way you have coolant and your fuel tank full of fissile fuel. You can then technically turn it on. However, you're not done yet, so I wouldn't quite do that. What we need to do is make sure that we have waste barrels set up. Because what will happen is it will produce nuclear waste. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn this on. And right now, this is set up for a rate limit of 0.1 millibuckets. You can increase this to, like, let's just say 1. And what that'll do is it'll drastically increase the heating rate over time. And it'll increase the burn rate, causing you to consume more fissile fuel and more coolant over time. But what this is doing is it's producing steam. If that steam builds up to a point where it gets a little bit too much, it will overheat and cause things to go bad for you. So you want to have yourself with a trash can so that way you can export it. Now that you have that, you want to make sure that the port is set up correctly. Okay, the port by default is set up to input only. Okay, there's 3 settings. We got input, output coolant, output waste. Okay, what you want to make sure you do is set up output waste on this side, where all of the radioactive barrels are. You will also be setting something else up here in a moment. But what we're going to concentrate on is getting the trash set up for some vapor. Okay, so you can see that input, output waste, or output coolant. The coolant is going to be this heated coolant tank. Okay, you don't want this to fill up because it will cause problems. So you need to output that. Now what we do is with water in the coolant tank, fuel tank being full of fissile fuel, and your outputs and inputs set up correctly, we can turn this puppy on and it'll start producing. Okay. So if you come over here and click on these barrels, you can see that they do have millibuckets worth of nuclear waste. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up an entangled block along with a waste barrel. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the B area. But what we need to do is bebop between this section and that section. Okay, so over in the B area, think of this waste barrel as in the B. What we'll do is entangle. Use your entangle binder, sneak right click it so you can see that it's highlighted, and then set it. Okay, because what you're gonna do is you're going to set up the waste going into this barrel. Okay, this is just to get things started. Things will change here in a moment. But let's go ahead and go over to the B area. One quick note before we jump into the productive bees. Make sure that in your compact machines, you force load the chunks that you're in, so that way everything works properly. If you don't, the setup won't work. So what we're going to be doing is, first step is to breed your bees. Okay, now what we're looking for is a iron bee and a Cree bee. Now, when this gets unloaded, it ends up turning into a random bee in the well, it could be crafted. Okay, so these two bees together can produce either a uraninite bee or a radioactive bee. So the way you fix that, these buttons don't work, so don't worry about that. But just pull one out and put it back in until you get what you want. So now that it's doing a radioactive bee, it'll produce bees left and right. What you need to do is provide this breeding chamber with flowers of the appropriate type. In this case, it's just any flower, so I'm just using some poppies. And produce some bee cages, so that way when they produce babies, they can plop them down into a bee cage, and then you transport them into the baby incubator and grow them up. Now that one is a uraninite bee, so I'm just gonna actually toss that. Okay, and in order to actually grow them up, you need to provide honey treats. Okay, so when that happens, what's going to happen is you'll have an adult bee. I have this modular router set up, so that way what it does is it will actuate the bee cage that's in here. Now, why is this not? That should be plopping bees down. I'm not sure why it's not. But what that will do is it will throw bees down into the world. Okay. Now, in here, we notice that there's no radiation. Okay. That's why we have this radioactive waste barrel. This is the barrel that I have set up with the entangled block next to my fission fuel reactor that is accepting the radioactive waste. And what we're doing is we're going to intentionally radiate this area by breaking it and placing it so that way we can repeat the process. Okay, so what we have here is a modular router with a breaker module, a vacuum module, and then a placer module. The order here is important. Okay, if you place the placer module first and then the breaker, you're going to have less uptime on your radioactive waste barrel. So make sure it's breaker, vacuum, placer. Okay, now you don't have to have these set up to whitelist radioactive waste barrel. You can set them to just blacklist. Okay, and what we have is a timer. I have it set to 6 seconds, so that way I can turn it on. Okay, the router is set to pulsed. Okay, so what's going to happen here is it's going to break it every 6 seconds. Notice that it's still there though. Break in place. Okay, and what that's going to do is it's going to release radiation into the atmosphere, because this is, I don't currently have the reactor running, but this would be full of radiation and it would leak it into this area. Now the bees that we're looking for are actually wasted radioactive bees, and we get that by spawning in radioactive bees and then having them die to radiation in the atmosphere. Upon death, they have a chance to become a wasted radioactive bee. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to simulate that. It is a little bit of a long process because they have a low chance to become a wasted radioactive bee. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to just spawn a bunch of radioactive bees. What's going to happen is these guys will consume radiation inside of this area and then use that as their quote-unquote flower to pollinate, so that way they produce combs. Now, how do we get the most out of these radioactive bees? Okay, first thing that we want to make sure we do is produce productivity upgrades. I recommend 3 for every single expansion box hive that you have, and then 1 speed upgrade, so that way they can jump in and out quicker. These guys do not work with the simulation upgrade, so don't do that, because they need, in order to do that, they would have to have the feeding slab in front of them, and the feeding slab can't have radioactive waste in the atmosphere, and it just doesn't work. Okay, so once that happens, you'll be producing radioactive waste combs. Okay, so you'll have a bunch of combs just coming in here, but you'll also, more importantly, have it be going to this chemical oxidizer. And what this can do is produce nuclear waste based off of these combs. Okay, so you'll have a bunch of nuclear waste just chilling. And what you can do is, if you want, that's not necessary, you can have the reactor turned off once you get your bees. Now, some people utilize the reactor in a far greater fashion because it can be a little bit quicker if you max things out and take care of it a little bit better than what I have. I just have mine set to the lowest burn rate on my Let's Play because I didn't want to have to maintain that reactor. So I just went heavy into wasted radioactive bees. In order to begin making the super phase shifter, the SPS, we need to make a number of items first. First up is going to be the HDPE sheets. So what we'll need is liquid ethylene. Okay, you've already made ethylene from part 1 of this guide. Okay, that comes from doing the entire pressurized setup to be able to make ethylene, you know, the gas burning generator bit. So you should have ethylene going. If you don't, go ahead and give that a look, so that way you can learn how to set that up. But what you need to do is convert the ethylene into liquid ethylene. And the way we do that is by using the condensator, making sure that it's set to condensating, not decon. Okay, and that'll change it into liquid ethylene. Once you have liquid ethylene, you'll want to put in some substrate, okay, and then it'll pop out some HDPE pellets. With those pellets, you'll combine 8 of them to make an HDPE sheet. It's a super easy automated craft. You can kind of set it and forget it and just force it to happen. Next up, we'll want to craft some solar neutron activators. We'll want 13 of these. 12 of them will be used in the SPS setup, and 1 of them will be used now before we get into the SPS. But to do that, we need 2 reinforced alloys, 2 elite control circuits, 3 bronze ingots, a steel casing, and an HDPE sheet. With the solar neutron activator, you'll also want to make another isotopic centrifuge, so that way we can make some material. So with nuclear waste going into both the solar neutron activator and the isotopic centrifuge, we'll be able to make polonium and plutonium. With polonium and plutonium tied in with the fluorite dust, we can make, using the pressurized reaction chamber with some water, we can make polonium pellets and plutonium pellets. You're going to need a lot of polonium pellets, so make sure that you concentrate on that for a while. You will need some plutonium pellets, but not a ton. These machines will end up creating spent nuclear waste, which you'll need to use radioactive waste barrels to get rid of, because there's no other way to use it. Now we can actually get into building the SPS. First up, we'll be crafting more reactor glass. We'll need approximately 118 of these, depending on if you want to see into your SPS or not. If you don't want that, go ahead and switch these out for the SPS casings. But the recipe is the same as what we just did. It's 4 lead ingots, 4 enriched iron, and glass for 4 reactor glass. For the SPS casing, this is where the polonium and the plutonium come into play starting. You'll need 4 polonium pellets, 4 HDPE sheets, and 1 plutonium pellet, and all that will do is get you 1 casing. You need 92 of these casings in order to make the SPS. 32 of them will be used in making the SPS ports, which is next. Okay, it'll require 4 SPS casings and 1 ultimate control circuit to make 1 port. You need a total of 8 SPS ports. Additionally, you'll want to make supercharged coils, which will attach to the SPS ports. You want 7 of these. 6 will be used for the SPS multi-block structure, and 1 of them will be used later on. Each one of these requires 3 polonium pellets, a laser, 2 ultimate control circuits, and 3 copper ingots. You'll also need a chemical crystallizer, which takes 4 refined obsidian ingots, 2 ultimate control circuits, a steel casing, and 2 fluorite. The SPS is a multi-block structure that has 6 sides. Generally speaking, the general shape of it looks like this. What we're going to do is build it together. So some things that you'll need to build with. We'll have the ultimate universal cable. Get a handful of these because you'll need to charge some chemical oxidizers. Grab at least 7 or 8 flux points. Any temporary block of your choice. I'm using orange wool just to make it stand out. Reactor glass, SPS casing, supercharged coils, SPS ports, 12 solar neutron activators, 12 chemical oxidizers, some pressurized tubing, and a chemical crystallizer. All right, so first up, we'll build ourselves the actual unit. Is we're going to have come out from the center, 1 block each, and then a temporary block. Okay. And then we're going to do 2 more temporary blocks. We can do a casing in the corner, and then casings on the side. And what we can do, before you put any other blocks down, make sure that you've gone ahead and set your point, because what you'll need is a port that gets placed on top of that. You see now it's accepting energy. Now we can fill this in with glass. And on top of your temporary blocks, place another temporary block. And add some SPS casing to that. Okay, now what we're looking for here is a circle. Okay, so we've already done the corner here. We need to bring this up 2 more on each corner. Okay, so now we have part of it set up to be a round circle. Now we can add temporary blocks. And 2 more temporary blocks on top of that. And now we can finish it off up here. And don't forget the ones in the corner. And now you should be able to remove all of your temporary blocks. All right, so we should have a little bit of an orb, if you will. Go ahead and place down 1 port on the front, and then we're going to place 2 ports up top. 1 needs to be in the center, though. Okay, the other one is for something else. Then we fill in with glass. And before you close anything off, come in here and place your coils. You can't place the last one just yet. I'm actually going to clean that off and place that so that way I can actually place it. And 1 more. Okay, so we should have 6 coils now inside. Go ahead and close it off. Particle effects make you aware that it is finished. And what we're going to do is just set up power for the rest of these ports real quick. The SPS requires a lot of power. Okay, it will drain your system early game if you don't have anywhere near enough. I had 6 power reactors at the max capacity, netting me somewhere like, I think of like 1.5 million per tick. And it was not enough. It's nowhere near enough. Okay, this thing will accept a lot of energy. All right, so now all of those coils are charged, and we still have a few things to set up. But before we do that, let's take a look at what we're about to set up in a small, compact way. This is why we need 12 solar neutron activators and 12 chemical oxidizers. Okay, so what we're going to do is from your B setup, you're obtaining wasted combs. Okay, so we have a bunch of wasted combs. Let's do that. Grab yourself a modular router and a distributor module. You'll need 2 of these. Okay. And what we can do is from the modular router, we can send over some wasted combs. There we go. Okay, and what this is going to do is it's going to consume the wasted radioactive combs and make nuclear waste. Okay, that will automatically get put into the solar neutron activators, which will be supplying the SPS with the required fuel. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is start from the bottom. Okay, we can place that in the wrong spot. You need power to go there. Okay. Now, grab yourself chemical oxidizers, and from the center, go ahead and place your 12. You may want to find a way to muffle those. They are kind of loud. With those placed, now you'll place your solar neutrons. Make sure that these are facing the way I am currently placing them. These do run off of solar energy. That's why they're called the solar neutron activator. So I highly recommend building this entire thing inside of the Everbright. I mentioned that before, but I can't stress it enough. It's always sunny in the Everbright. All right, so grab yourself some pressurized tubing, and what we can do is place it into the port and then bring all of this up into the activators. Okay, so now the activators will be able to produce the needed material, and it'll push it into your SPS. Okay, so give me a second real quick, and I'm gonna set up a large scale wasted comb setup so that way I can show this in action. Okay, as you can see, we have a lot of wasted combs getting slammed down into the wasted, into it, creating nuclear waste. Now all we have to do is make sure that we have the proper setup. Okay, so we need it set to output on top on all of your Okay, so this is now being slammed full of polonium. It's 1,000 millibuckets of polonium for 1 millibucket of antimatter. Okay, that antimatter then gets pushed down into your crystallizer. Okay, with 1,000 millibuckets of antimatter, it will create 1 antimatter pellet. Next up, we have the Gravitational Modulating Unit. This requires 3 antimatter pellets, which is why we needed to get that set up. And we need 3 gravitational modulating units for the Wither's compass. Additionally, we also need the ultimate induction provider, 2 of them, a module base, 2 atomic alloys, and another star. These ultimate induction providers are another long craft. Okay, for 1 induction provider, you need 4 elite induction providers, which you need 4 advanced induction providers for, and then you also need 4 basic induction provider for each advance. Make sure that when you're doing this, you go for the ultimate induction provider, not the ultimate induction cell. Okay, provider, not cell. Each basic induction provider requires you to have 4 basic control circuits, 4 lithium dust, and a basic energy cube. If you haven't already crafted basic energy cubes, I'd be surprised, but here's the recipe just in case. You need 2 energy tablets, 2 iron ingots, 4 redstone dust, and a steel casing. In total, you're going to need 384 basic induction providers for 1 ATM star. For 19 stars, you'll need 7,300 approximately. So setting up auto crafting on this is going to be extremely important. There is technically 2 ways to obtain lithium dust. One of those ways is a very long and grueling process that is actually rather buggy. Check out my Let's Play if you want to experience that. The other one is far more efficient, and it's actually pretty fast. Our preferred method of obtaining lithium dust is going to be done via thermal evaporation in mechanism. When looking in JEI, there are 2 different lithiums. We have a lithium fluid and then a liquid lithium. You want to be searching for liquid lithium because otherwise it won't show up in JEI. In order to craft yourself a thermal evaporation setup, it is a multi-block structure, and it does have certain height requirements. It's a max of 18 tall, and I believe as small as 1 by 2 on the interior. So we need a lot of thermal evaporation blocks, which require you to have 4 steel ingots and a copper ingot. You also will need thermal evaporation valves, which requires 4 thermal evaporation blocks and 1 advanced control circuit. You also want at least 2 thermal evaporation controllers. Those require 5 thermal evaporation blocks, a bucket, a glass pane, and 2 advanced control circuits. My preferred method of heating up these thermal evaporation structures is resistive heaters. All you have to do is supply heat to these, and it gives heat to the surrounding area. These require 4 tin ingots, 3 redstone dust, a steel casing, and an energy tablet. So this structure right here is a working thermal evaporation plant. Notice that it's pretty small. Okay, it has the controller, blocks, and 2 valves. I didn't set anything up on this, but you would probably need 4 valves for each, at least. Okay, because you need to be able to put in water from the first one. And you also need to be able to heat it up. In this one, we have 4, because otherwise it won't heat up to where it needs to be. And behind each of these was a valve. Okay, so the heat is going in through the valve. Okay. If this is 18 tall, okay, notice on every single one of these, the top layer is missing the corners. You don't need those. You would need 212 for each tower. So it's a lot of crafting. They're really cheap though, so go crazy with it. With your evaporation tower now selecting water, Okay, it's actually not. Let's grab a configurator. Okay, so now it's producing brine. This will eventually level out to the correct temperature. Brine then gets pulled into the next tower. With your brine being pushed into the second tower, you need to provide this with its own heat source as well, so keep that in mind. Now with the brine being input here, we are outputting liquid lithium. Okay, and that is going into a rotary condensator set to decondensating. So that way it's taking liquid lithium, putting it into lithium, and lithium is getting shifted into the chemical crystallizer and producing lithium dust. Next up, and the final piece of the Wither's Compass is the Wither Builder. But before we're able to craft that, naturally, as is every other part of the Wither's Compass, we have a little bit of processing and build-up and setups to do. Okay, so let's get started with the smallest part of it, the pity machine frame. You need 4 oak logs, a block of redstone, and 4 iron ingots. That will be used to make some fluid extractors, along with some iron ingots, some sort of cobblestone, a piston, and a light-weighted pressure plate, which is just 2 gold ingots. Okay, notice that the face of this has 2 spinning blades. Okay, when you place it, it places facing away from you. So facing in the same direction that you're facing. Okay, that's going to be important because what you want to do is to make sure that you face it facing the log. Okay, because once you start powering this, what's going to happen is it's going to start consuming the log. Okay, and what that does is it produces latex. So right now I only have 1 of these with power. If we are 2 of them with power, if we produce, or if we grab more, why can't I fly? Okay, it'll speed up the process and it produces latex. Okay, that latex can then be used to make tiny dry rubber using this latex processing unit. You can also just store the fluid because you need that later down the road in the dissolution chamber. But you can make it these tiny little tiny dry rubber. Okay, using the latex machine, and they are used to make in a 3x3, so you need 9 of them to make dry rubber. Dry rubber being smelted makes plastic, and plastic is going to be required for everything down the line in this build. So you'll need plenty of plastic. Now, some of them do have another plastic that you can make, this plastic sheet, which can actually come from bees. Yeah, bees. So if you want to set up a plastic bee, by all means, you can do that too. I have both in my Let's Play. I have this set up because that's what I started with long before I got into productive bees. And most of these recipes will allow you to use the other plastic sheet as well. So next up, and probably one of the more important parts because you're going to be using this machine a lot, is the dissolution chamber. That requires a diamond gear, 2 gold ingots, a pity machine, 2 buckets, 2 plastic, and a chest. Our first piece that we'll be making in the dissolution chamber will either be the lenses from the drills or the simple machine frame. The simple machine frame requires a gold gear, 2 iron ingots, 2 nether brick, 2 plastic, a pity machine, and some latex. I think it's 250. With the simple machine frame, you can then also craft the advanced machine frame, which takes diamond gear, 2 gold ingots, 2 netherite ingots, 2 plastic, and a simple machine frame with pink slime. Now, I haven't shown you pink slime yet, so let's jump into that. Using the Mob Slaughter Factory, which is a rather cheap craft with only 2 plastic, a gold gear, a pity machine, 2 swords, 2 iron axes, and a redstone, you can use this machine to kill mobs like a cow or the villager to be able to obtain pink slime. In my world, I ended up using only villagers because the cows were producing some meat, I think it is. Yeah, there we go. Liquid meat. And that's not something that I wanted. It was kind of a pain in the butt to manage. So I just switched over to using villagers and got plenty of pink slime. You don't need a lot of pink slime because you really don't need too many of these by the end of the day. In a previous part of the guide, we covered how to make the fluid laser base and the stasis. In an earlier part of the guide, we talked about how to create the fluid laser base. But what we're looking for here is some ether gas. Okay, so with a fluid laser base over the wither, trapped by a stasis chamber. Technically, you don't need to trap it with a stasis chamber, but this guarantees that it won't move around and it won't destroy stuff. And a purple lens, we will be able to slowly create ether gas. Biome doesn't matter. I have mine in the mining dimension. Okay, so how do we craft the stasis chamber? That requires you to have a piston, 2 gold gears, 2 gas tiers, 3 soul sand, and an advanced machine. And what that looks like is this. Okay, you place the stasis chamber below, and it has a working area above it. Okay, so you can hide and show the working area. I have it showing just that way for demonstration purposes. It is currently in, I think, a 3x3. Yeah, 3x3. Yep. So what's going to happen when you spawn your wither, it's going to go into the animation that it goes into before it becomes a full-fledged boss, and it gets stuck that way. That's fine because all you need is the wither. Now, what else you need is to have the fluid laser base directly above it. In this setup, I think I actually have it a little bit too high. It needs to go down one, be able to see it. If the wither moves off to the side, it won't work. It needs to be directly under it. Okay, so in a 1 block. Okay, 1 block away. And that'll just produce ether gas. We need ether gas for the next craft, okay, which would be the Supreme Machine Frame. This requires a diamond gear, 2 diamonds, 2 netherite ingot, 2 plastic, an advanced machine frame, and ether gas. Okay. Without the ether gas, you won't be able to make the Supreme Machine, and the Supreme Machine goes into making the final piece of the Wither's Compass, the Wither Builder. It requires 3 soul sand, 2 Wither skeleton skulls, the Supreme Machine Frame, 2 plastic, and a nether star. And with all of that, we now have all the pieces required to be able to make our very first Wither's Compass with 4 antimatter crystals, 3 gravitational modulating units, a wither builder, and the heart of the deep. Now it's on to the Nexium Emitter. While crafting the SPS, you will have learned how to craft the supercharged coil. You need one of those for the Nexium Emitter. So let's go on to the next item. Player Transmitter Nitro. Nitro is the final tier within Power. You might know this from doing the energizing rods from part 1 of this guide, but the recipe is kind of similar in that it's the same layout for all versions of the player transmitter, just with different material. Okay, so the Nitro requires spirited and dielectric casing and dielectric rod with the nitro capacitors to upgrade a transmitter. To get the spirited, you need to use spirited capacitors and the niotic transmitter. To get the niotic transmitter, you would need the niotic capacitor with the blazing transmitter. To get the blazing, you would need the blazing capacitors with a hardened transmitter. And to get the hardened transmitter, you would need a hardened capacitor or two with a basic transmitter, basic capacitors with the starter transmitter. The starter transmitter requires you to use 2 tiny basic capacitors, a dielectric casing, a dielectric rod, and this thing called a player aerial pearl. Now, you'll notice here that when you go to JEI and you click, and you'll notice when you go to JEI and hit use on this, or recipe rather, the player aerial pearl tells you to use an aerial pearl on zombie or husk. Okay, there's no recipe for that specifically, but there is a recipe for the actual aerial pearl. That requires you to have 4 iron bars, 4 dielectric paste, and an ender pearl. Okay, once you have that, you right click on a zombie and it's done. It's super easy to make 19 of these and get them done so that way you don't have to worry about it a little bit later. You can just set it and forget it for auto crafting. Next up, we need singularities. Okay, so these are made through matter condenser. You might as well set up at least 2 of these to be able to get a matter ball and a singularity, because you will need matter balls a little bit later. But all you need to do is supply items to the matter condenser, and it condenses it into the item that you've selected. Now in here, you'll notice that this isn't actually producing anything. This 1K ME storage component is only allowing for 8,192 stored energy. Okay, the different components increase or change the amount of stored energy that's available. A singularity specifically requires well, it doesn't say it in here, but it requires 256,000 stored energy. So you need a 64K storage component in here in order to be able to craft singularities. Now, it's super, super easy to be able to do this, because all you have to do is supply the matter condenser with water, as I have. It's not all that fast. You could increase that if you wanted to, but just set it and forget it, and you'll have them ready for when you need them. This is really early, because all it takes to craft this is 4 iron ingots, 4 glass, and a fluix dust. Really cheap. Next up is the solar recharging unit. We will want 3 of these for each star. They're not terribly expensive once you have the polonium pellets made. That's just the longest process in them. You need 3 polonium pellets, 4 reinforced alloys, a module base, and an advanced solar generator. The solar generators require 3 iron ingots, 4 solar generators, 2 infused alloys, and these solar generators require 2 osmium ingots, an energy tablet, 2 infused alloys, an iron ingot, and 3 solar panels. Each solar panel requires 3 osmium ingots, 2 redstone dust, an infused alloy, and 3 glass panes. Our next piece is the EV solar panel. This is another lengthy crafting process, which I have automated in my Let's Play. And the reason for that is because you end up needing 216 LV solar panels for one EV solar panel. Times that by 19 to see how many you need. It's a lot. And the reason why it's a lot is because one EV solar panel requires 6 HV solar panels, an antimatter, large coolant cell, and a block of netherite. Each HV solar panel requires 6 MV solar panels, an energy crystal, an advanced machine block, and an iridium circuit. Now, you can see where this is starting to get a little bit heavy on the crafting side. Iridium circuits are made by crafting with 4 advanced alloys, 2 advanced circuits, 2 graphene, and an iridium alloy. The advanced machine block is crafted using 4 copper coils, 2 advanced alloy, 2 carbon plates, a machine block. Now, how do you get advanced alloy? Advanced alloy comes from mixed metal blend, okay? It's not advanced alloy blend or dust, it's mixed metal blend. Now, the neat thing about the mixed metal blend is that you can combine numerous different things, okay? This top row here can be a combination of lead and iron dust. You can have 3 of iron, 3 of lead. This middle row, you can do Constantine dust, bronze, or electrum. Bottom row, you can do tin or aluminum dust to make mixed metal blends. And then all you have to do with that is smelt it. Now, you also need iridium alloy. Iridium alloy takes iridium ingots, which is just iridium, advanced alloy, and a diamond. You just need one of those, so it's not too terribly expensive. You'll also need to craft yourself a compressor if you haven't already, because you need to be able to make some carbon plates. The way you do that is you craft some carbon fiber mesh using carbon fiber in a 2x2, and then compress it into a carbon plate. Now, each MV solar panel requires 6 LV solar panels, an energy crystal, an advanced alloy, and an advanced circuit. Each LV solar panel requires 2 electronic circuits, 3 glass, 2 coal dust, a silicon, and a basic generator. So by the end of this process, you will have crafted 216 of these for one EV solar panel. Another piece of the EV solar panel is this large coolant cell. This requires 6 tin ingots, 2 medium coolant cells, and a dense copper plate. The dense copper plate is just compressing 8 copper plates inside of a compressor to be able to get a dense copper plate. Each medium cell requires 6 tin ingots and 3 small coolant cells. Each small coolant cell requires 4 tin ingots and a fluid cell. Each fluid cell requires, this actually is specifically water, okay? Now, if you go to try to use R on this for the recipe, it doesn't have a recipe, okay? When you're looking up fluid cell, JEI, okay, you're looking for the base version, which is this. Okay, so what you get is 4 tin ingots makes 4 of these fluid cells. And then you need to be able to fill this with water. Now, you can do that manually if you want, just by going to the water and right-clicking on it, or you can automate it. I've chosen to automate it. In my Let's Play, I had auto crafting set up for the fluid cells, and then I just exported them out into a create setup where it's using a spout filling with water to dispense into the fluid cell. It is 1 bucket per. So in this, you can see that it's just filling up. And that's basically all I did was anytime I crafted these fluid cells, I forcibly filled them with water because the only thing that I needed it for was for the EV solar panel. So I just forced it to happen. Now in this case, I just happened to be destroying them, but super easy little setup. You just need to fill it with water and recollect them into your system so that way you can start your crafting process. Next is going to be a little bit of a longer craft using immersive engineering. Now, I'm going to slightly assume that you've gotten into immersive engineering at least a little bit and know how to obtain treated wood because you need a fair amount of treated wood. But our goal in immersive engineering is to get to the Tesla coil. A Tesla coil is crafted using an iron mechanical component. These you can craft or you can find them all over the place in chests. I found basically all of mine, almost all of them in chests throughout loot dungeons. So if you see these, just save them. You'll need them. It's also used. You'll also need an HV accumulator, an advanced electronic component, an electrum coil block, and 3 iron plates. An electrum coil block, pretty simple. You need 8 MV wire coils and an iron ingot. An MV wire coil is simply 4 electrum wire and a stick. You get 1 electrum wire by cutting an electrum plate, or you can do it through a metal press and get 2. It's a little bit more efficient, but then you'd have to set up an entire press for it. The HV accumulator requires 4 treated wood planks, 2 steel ingots, an aluminum plate, a bucket of redstone acid, an HOP graphite ingot. The bucket of redstone acid requires 4 redstone dust and a water bucket. Now this does kind of look a little bit familiar or similar to lava when you're looking at it. So don't get confused by that. It's a bucket of redstone acid, not lava. To get started on a lot of this crafting, you'll want to craft yourself an engineer's workbench, which requires a treated wood fence, 2 treated wood slabs, an iron ingot, and an engineer's crafting table. Engineer's crafting table requires 3 treated wood slabs, a crafting table, and 4 treated sticks. Specifically sticks that are treated, not just regular sticks. Okay, this allows you to put blueprints in, which changes the items that you're allowed to craft inside of it. Okay, so you will have different blueprints that are available, and you need to make sure that you craft the correct ones. Okay, so notice here that we have metal press molds, common projectiles, specialized projectiles, crafting components, banner patterns, arc furnace electrodes. Okay, so there's quite a few of them. For an ATM star, you actually only need 2 different blueprints. You need a metal press mold and crafting components. Okay, the reason why you need those is because in here you can see that the advanced electronic circuit is there, and also the iron mechanical component is there. You also need some vacuum tubes. And inside of the metal press, you'll need the metal press mold plate. The reason you need the metal press plate blueprint is to be able to craft yourself the Duraplast sheet. The Duraplast sheet is a little bit of a lengthy process as well. This requires you to have phenolic resin inside of a bottling machine to be able to make yourself one Duraplast sheet. Okay, in order to get the phenolic resin, you have to go through a lengthy process. So let's jump over to my Let's Play so that way I can show you all of that setup instead of reproducing it here. We're here in my Let's Play world, and they went and changed things rather drastically from the time that I set all of this up for the sheets. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from the very end of actually making the Duraplast. What you need to do is have a bottling machine with phenolic resin, right? And that will produce a bunch of Duraplast sheets. In order to get phenolic resin, you need to combine creosote and the acetaldehyde. And this is where things changed a little bit. The acetal now requires you to use a silver plate with ethanol. Ethanol was not the liquid that was used before. So this requires you to make an industrial fermenter and then throw some potatoes, melons, tomatoes, sweet berries, apples, sugarcane, glowberries, honey bottles, or beetroot into this industrial fermenter because you need the ethanol to be able to do that. Now, that actually gets rid of numerous machines. So all of this setup over here is basically pointless. If you watch the Let's Play, you know what that setup is, but it no longer works. Our last item for the Nexium Emitter is going to be the wireless crafting terminal. Now you can craft this in two different ways, but I'm going to show you the AE way. Our final piece for the Nexium Emitter is going to be the wireless universal terminal from AE2. First up, you'll want to craft this wireless crafting terminal. You'll want two of these. These require a dense energy cell, a meat crafting terminal, and a wireless receiver. The wireless receiver requires 3 iron ingots, a quartz fiber, and a Fluix pearl. The Fluix pearl requires 4 Fluix crystal, 4 Fluix dust, and an ender pearl. Next up, we'll craft a wireless pattern encoding terminal. This actually uses one of the wireless crafting terminals that you crafted before, along with an engineering processor. Next up, the wireless universal terminal uses the second wireless crafting terminal and the wireless pattern encoding terminal that you just crafted. Finally, we have the actual crafting of the Nexium Emitter with the transmitter, the universal terminal, the solar recharging unit, the supercharged coil, the Tesla coil, the Singularity, and the EV solar panel. Our final big ticket item for part 3 of the ATM Star Guide is going to be the pulsating black hole. You will have already been able to craft the antimatter pellet, the nether star, and the antimatter. Now we're looking for the other 6 items. And first up is going to be the Infinity Nuke. Be aware that when you go to JEI for the recipe for the pulsating black hole, that the Infinity Nuke does not give you the recipe. For whatever reason, the NBT data for the one that's showing is not accurate. So what I want you to do is search in JEI for Infinity Nuke, and the first one in the list will provide you with the recipe. Okay, so in a dissolution chamber, you combine 2 nether stars, arranged tier 12 add-on, 4 TNT, a block of diamond, and then ether gas. Next up is going to be the Vial of Searing Expulsion. This is going to require 4 gem dust, 2 blaze rods, a magma cream, a thick potion, and a lava bucket. Next up is the Lightning Bomb. Lightning Bomb requires 1 TNT with a lightning grenade. Lightning grenade requires 8 ender pearls and a weather container full of Thunderstruck. Now, the way you get this, and it's a little bit hard to show you in here, is to take a weather container, which requires you to use a dark gem, a glass bottle, and sugar, and go out into the wilderness and collect the weather. Now, the goal is to get the Thunderstruck. Okay, Thunderstruck can be crafted using when the rain begins to fall with 2 glowstone dust, or during sunshine, you can gather the sunshine and combine water buckets to be able to craft when the rain begins to fall. The reason why this is important is because in the world will generate some evil craft ritual areas. I forget what the actual the item is called, but it shoots up a large beam in the sky. Okay, you can use that to gather the weather. It will go on cooldown, so you can't repeatedly do it back to back, but what it'll do is it will change the time of day and the weather based on what you just did. If you stick around those rituals too long, it will give you some ill side effects, so I would move on rather quickly because they will get increasingly worse. But if you're in a thunderstorm, you can directly get the Thunderstruck. If it's raining, you can gather the rain one. If it's sunshine, you can gather that and then craft the rain and then craft the Thunderstruck. Next up is going to be the Micromissles. Micromissles require 4 plastic, a fire charge, a finished PCB, and a TNT. This finished PCB is a lengthy process of a craft. Okay, it takes some capacitors and transistors along with an unassembled PCB, which takes a little bit of a crafting setup. But there is a significantly easier way to obtain that. If you get yourself a villager and give him the charging station working station, he will take on the job of pressure mechanic. Pressure mechanics have the ability to have their final trade be a finished PCB. In my Let's Play, I have 3 of these villagers. 2 of them have finished PCBs. You don't need a ton of them, so setting up an entire process just to be able to craft that, unless you're going deep into pneumatic craft, is not really necessary. I would just get yourself these villagers. Next up is the ME Quantum Ring. This requires 4 iron ingots, a Fluix ME dense smart cable, an energy cell, 2 logic processors, and 1 engineering processor. Next up is the Nuke. That is what you think it is. It is a nuke. If you accidentally set this off, bad things will happen. Be careful. Warning. These require you to use 4 quad uranium fuel rods, 2 TNT, 2 advanced circuits, and an advanced machine block. In order to craft these quads, what you'll have to first do is craft yourself a fluid cell with water and uranium dust to be able to get a uranium fuel rod. You then combine the 2 uranium fuel rods and a dense copper plate to make a dual uranium fuel rod. You then combine 2 of those with 3 dense copper plates to get the quad. You now have all of the items needed in order to craft the pulsating black hole. However, you have to craft the pressure chamber to be able to actually craft it. So the way we do that is starting off by crafting reinforced stone, which is simply 8 stone with a compressed iron ingot. Compressed iron ingots are very common in loot chests in all the mods 8. I never had to craft any of these because I just kept getting them out of chests. Once you have the reinforced stone, you combine 4 of them into reinforced bricks. And then reinforced bricks is what you use to craft pretty much everything else for the pressure chamber. You combine 6 reinforced bricks, a pressure tube, and a furnace to get an air compressor. I recommend making 3 of these just for a little bit of speed. If you have a better way of producing compression for the, or pressure for the pressure chamber, by all means, you can do that. I went with 3 of these and it worked out just fine. Next up, you'll want 4 pressure chamber valves. These are for taking in the air pressure from the air compressors. To get those, you need 4 pressure chamber walls and a pressure tube. We will now need to craft pressure chamber glass, which takes 8 reinforced bricks and glass. You don't necessarily need these. Notice here that I only have 7 here. You can keep it totally solid if you want, but I like to see inside of that. Finally, you'll want to craft pressure chamber walls because you'll need them in some of the recipes, but they take just 8 reinforced bricks. This is a 5x5x5, so you'll want to make sure that it's hollow on the inside, but solid across the rest of them. Next up, we'll need 2 pressure chamber interfaces. These interfaces have 2 sides that matter to you. Okay, notice that the blue is always where I'm facing. Okay, if we place it and then turn around, it's actually the opposite. So when you're building this, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you get into the chamber first and then place on the outside, or place from facing the outside, so that way you have an output coming out here, because this is where your pulsating black hole will actually go. Once you have this entire thing set up, what's going to happen is you'll provide the air compressors with coal, and over time it will gradually increase the pressure inside this chamber. You can set this chamber up to allow you to expel excess pressure by installing an upgrade. Okay, so if we search for pneumatic, what we're looking for here is the security upgrade. Okay, so what this does is it goes in a lot of areas and it checks for the pressure of a unit, and if it will explode, it will expel instead of exploding. So we can plop that in here, and every time it goes too far past the 5 mark, or into the red zone here, the danger zone, it will expel. Luckily for us, that is right around 5. And for the black hole, the goal is slightly before 5. So you're good to go to just kind of just let it go. If you want to keep it going, you're more than welcome to. The pressure will stay around for a little bit of time, so you've got a little bit of leeway. You can get it to 5 millibars of pressure and let it go. And for the last item of this part of the ATM star guide, we have the Patrick star. The Patrick star is made out of a lot of different concrete. It is only 4 different colors, but it's 55 different versions, or rather a total of 55 with 4 different versions, and the values are slightly different. So you'll need 11 pink concrete, 5 pink concrete powder, 8 green concrete, 8 green concrete powder, 13 magenta concrete, 8 magenta concrete powder, and 2 lime concrete. Now, the way you make those, they're all the same. It just depends on which dye you use to make. So you'll need 4 sand and 4 gravel and your dye of choice. I put a dye essence here because you can craft dye using dye essence. So you'll need lime, magenta, green, and pink. Okay, so you have those 4 different varieties that you'll need to craft. Now, instead of doing it the hard way of having to placing concrete manually on against running water, okay, you can do this separately by using the fluid encapsulator. Okay, this, all you do is fill it with water, and then you push in the powder and it pumps out the actual concrete. So in order to craft that, you take a redstone flux coil, 2 copper gears, 2 glass, a machine frame, and a bucket. You can automate this using AE2 or the other system. It's actually extremely easy, thus making the Patrick Star easy to craft. But then you come to the part of needing to actually lay it out in the 55 different mechanical crafters. Okay, I want to point this out because it can get a little bit tedious, if you will. Notice that some of these look exactly the same, right? These two very similar in color, but they're slightly different. Okay. Just make sure you're paying attention to where you put the concrete versus where you put the powder and how much you put of each. You're looking for a total of 55, and you have that with this. That wraps up part 2 of the ATM Star Guide. If this helped you in your journey of the ATM Star, please consider giving this video a like and sharing with your friends. If you'd like something clarified, let me know below and I'll do my best to help. Once additional portions of this guide have been released, you can find them in the description below. In the next video, we'll cover some more parts of the ATM Star, so click that subscribe button, bell notification, so you can be notified when it's released. To stay up to date, check the links below so that way you can follow on your preferred platform. Please drop a comment to let me know what you think. And as always, thanks for chilling.